It was my mother's dream to get out of the apartment and get a home of her own, but she died young and she never achieved that dream. Not having enough money was a cause of constant tension. And when you're 5 or 6 years of age and your parents are yelling at each other, it's, you think back on it now, it's traumatic and it's hard.
54 years ago, you were in the front lines of trying to desegregate school housing at the University of Chicago. You were even arrested.
Don't tell anybody that. Injustice is something that I have always fought throughout my life.
He won his first election by just 10 votes, a genuine upset. An independent beating both the Democrats and the Republicans.
The Board of Aldermen blocked all of his key appointments. They even blocked his secretary. Sanders actually figured out how to get around that obstruction and govern the city according to his values.
Bernie gave the city more daycare. That made him popular. He built low-income housing. That made him popular, too. He also brought in rent control, a land speculation tax, and tougher development laws.
In 1 year's time, Sanders doubled voter turnout, dramatically increasing the level of popular participation and bringing the citizens back into engagement with their city government.
Ordinary citizens feel very hopeless about the future. In Burlington, we have shown that you can stand up to the system, and at least you can win some good victories.
He then went on to win re-election 3 times, including once against a candidate who was backed by both major parties because, the one thing that brings establishment Democrats and Republicans together is their commitment to defeating anyone with their own working class base of support.
And I don't know about you, but I hail from a tradition that says that you will know the tree by the fruit that it bears, and Senator Bernie Sanders bears good fruit.
For the last 150 years or so, the United States government has decided that Latin America should be a colony of the United States government, and that countries which attempt to stand up and do things for their own people rather than for American corporations are not to be tolerated.
I would like to see a candidate who has the guts to have a vision that America could be a land for all people, not just the land controlled by the super rich.
What I told the people of the state throughout the campaign is I intend to go down to Washington to be the best congressman that I can be from the state of Vermont. As I was out on the campaign trail, if I heard it once, I heard it 100 times. Bernie, you go down there and you give him hell. And that is exactly what I intend to do.
I fear very much that what we said yesterday is that war and the enormous destructive power of our armed forces is our preferred manner for dealing with the very complicated and terrible crises in the Middle East. I fear that someday we will regret that decision, and that we are in fact laying the groundwork for more and more wars in that region. We have the highest percentage of people in America in jail per capita of any industrialized nation on earth. We've beaten South Africa. We've beaten the Soviet Union. What do we have to do? Put half the country behind bars?
We finally have somebody in our lifetime who will be unflinching. That his only special interests are sisters and brothers in Queens. His only special interests are sisters and brothers in Denmark, South Carolina. His only special interests, hello Flint, Michigan. His only special interest.
We have an approach to campaign financing which, to a very large degree, allows wealthy people and major corporations to buy and sell politicians. The rich get richer, the poor get poorer, and ordinary Americans are shut out of the political system. In case you don't know, and you haven't seen the latest polls, the American people hold the President of the United States in contempt. They hold this institution in contempt. They hold the Republican Party in contempt. They hold the Democratic Party in contempt.
There's a part of you that feels a kinship with Senator Sanders?
Yeah, there is, because he stands on principle, and on occasion we agree on those principles, because we used to kid each other. We would support some legislation and people would say, how are you doing this with a socialist? I said, we're both against corporatism. We're both against the special benefits to big business, which was true.
Do we believe, as the Canadians do, and as most industrialized nations do, that health care is a right of all people? Or do we believe that quality health care should be a privilege of wealth?
They go back earlier, say to the Reagan years, about 70% of the population thought that national health care should be in the Constitution, but he's dismissed as radical and extremist.
He voted against these rotten trade deals that steal wealth from our community.
Mr. Speaker, when multinational corporations throw American workers out on the street and move to China, where workers are paid 15 cents an hour, where slave labor exists, where basic democratic rights are ignored, where workers cannot organize free trade unions, that scenario may be good for the profit margins of the large corporations, but it is a disaster for American workers.
There is only one Senator Bernard Sanders, so let the record reflect that there is only one, just in case folks don't understand that being similar is not being the same. Come on, somebody.
The average working person today has very little rights. Corporations announce worker comes to work on a Friday, and the corporation says, oh, by the way, we're moving to Mexico. You worked for our company 30 years, here's a few bucks. You have no power to say over it. You don't have any power over your job. So I think the major challenge we face is not only a redistribution of wealth, which is important, but a redistribution of power.
His only special interests are the people of this great nation. So, yeah, there are many copies, but there is only one original.
So the basic issue is, how do you reinvigorate democracy? How to make the average working person, the elderly person, the poor person say, you know what, this is my government. Those people in Washington listen to me, they're representing my interest, and they're not just standing with the rich and the powerful against me. Now, how do you do that? That has to do with the media, who owns and controls the media. It has to do with the two-party system. It has to do with campaign financing and the fact that many of the candidates are heavily indebted to wealthy people and corporations who buy them.
Dr. King, in his last 2 years of life, talked about a poor people's campaign, organizing unions on behalf of poor workers, organizing against a war machine that was perpetuating violence in Vietnam. Bernie Sanders is the only politician who has consistently, for 50 years, taken that social justice platform into politics.
Yes, the CEOs of major corporations saw a 54% increase in their compensation. Yes, the stock market is hitting off the wall. Yes, the rich are getting richer. But what about the average worker? Well, the front pages of corporate America's newspapers don't talk about it.
And I know sometimes people talk about the angry black woman, but I'm going to tell you something. If you ain't mad as a mofo about what's going on here, something is wrong with you.
These are the very same banks that refuse to loan money for economic development and job creation in communities all over America. But there is unlimited amounts of money to be lent to gamblers in their non-productive efforts to guess if interest rates will rise or fall.
Mad about a system that allows CEOs to make money hand over fist while other folks got to grovel for a living. Mad at the fact that we don't have leaders who won't equivocate for standing up for the people. Mad that folks are living out on the streets. Mad that people are too afraid to go see a doctor because they can't afford it.
Big money interests are pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the political process, and the wealthiest 0.25% provide over 80% of campaign contributions. More and more millionaires are running for office, while the middle class and working families are voting less and less and participating in lower numbers. Let us have the guts to pass real campaign finance reform, and let's do it now.
In this new, historic freshman congressional class, an overwhelming amount of them now reject corporate PAC money. That's thanks to Bernie.
In our own country, one person now owns more wealth than the bottom 40% of the nation. The gap between the rich and the poor in the United States is now wider than in any other industrialized country on earth. As I understand it, the total wealth of the world's 3 richest individuals is greater than the combined gross domestic product of the 48 poorest countries, 1/4 of the world's population.
And right now we have an opportunity to elect someone who is directly out of the philosophy of Kingian nonviolence. We can directly elect someone that cares about poor people, cares about women, gay, black rights, cares about lives that don't look like his. And this opportunity in history is not going to come in another 20 years, not going to come in another 2 years.
If you want to know why prescription drug costs in this country are by far the highest in the world, and why Congress year after year is unable to pass prescription drug reform to protect the elderly and the sick, understand the tens of millions of dollars that the pharmaceutical industry pours in to the United States Congress and into the White House.
Unless we have a mobilization, a real movement to get big money out of politics and to cure up, to kind of deal with this imbalance in our economy, it's not going to be remedied on its own. And that's why I support Bernie Sanders. He's leading a movement.
Many of us believe that fight against terrorism must be waged in a way that does not undermine the basic constitutional rights and protections that have made us a great and free country. The question, Mr. Speaker, is not whether we like Saddam Hussein or not. The question is whether he represents an imminent threat to the American people and whether a unilateral American invasion of Iraq will do more harm than good.
He fought for these aims and these ends when they came at the highest political cost in America.
Bailing out Wall Street is the only way to save Main Street, so says the president.
Now, maybe I'm the only person in America who thinks so, but I have a hard time understanding why we are giving $700 billion to the Secretary of the Treasury, who was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs, who, along with other financial institutions, actually got us into this problem. Some people became incredibly rich, and then when things got bad, it's the average Joe who has to bail them out. I think there is an outrage on the part of the people, Mr. Chairman, that is not necessarily perceived here in Congress.
Here's the thing. We are not going to win the world that we need, not just the world that we want, but the world that we need, if we are kind of sort of in favor of it. We are going to have to be on fire for it. And that is why I support Bernie Sanders to be the next president of the United States.
The first senator to vow opposition to the president's tax cut deal with the Republican Party, speaking to an empty chamber but an enthralled nation. This was the leading trend on Twitter in this country and the second leading one worldwide.
So we can't afford to give $14 billion to help some of the people in this country who are struggling the hardest. Can't do that. But somehow we can afford to give $32.7 billion in tax breaks to one of the richest families in this country. If that makes sense to anybody, please call up my office.
All told, about 1/3 of America's workers, 50 million of them, 50 million, will get a tax hike as part of an alleged tax cut from President Obama and the Republican Party.
They were fearless.
Yes.
These were people prepared to stand up to anybody.
Yes.
And they didn't care about the consequence for themselves or even political consequence. They were driven by a higher calling. Do you see that anymore in modern leaders?
No, I do not. And I think that is what's truly absent. I think a lot of guys are politically smart. They can play the chess game, but they've lost moral compass. And it is the absence of that moral vision and the absence of that moral courage that I think we suffer from.
Would you be in it to win it or in it to articulate
That I know
issues?
the answer to. If I ran, I would run to win. Now, I know that if I do this, I start off as a significant underdog. You know, 70% of the American people don't even know who Bernie Sanders is.
The word snowball's chance comes to mind.
His views may be gaining traction. Sanders is currently in second place among Democratic voters.
I don't think he's going to provide much of a challenge. I don't even think he's much of an ideological challenge. I think that this is a resistance vote, and it's all going to disappear by the time we get to Iowa next spring.
Bernie Sanders' campaign is on fire right now. Front runner to win the New Hampshire primary. And but for the flip of a coin or two, he came awfully close to winning the Iowa caucuses, too.
His tails.
It looks like we are in a virtual tie.
His campaign raised $3 million in just 24 hours after Iowa. Integrity and authenticity are words his supporters use.
Have endorsed Bernie Sanders. I think he represents opportunity. I think he represents a moral imperative. I think he represents a certain kind of truth that's not often evidenced in the course of politics. I would suggest that to those of you who have not yet made up your minds, or maybe even some of you who have made up your minds, to maybe consider and reconsider what it is that Bernie Sanders offers. He offers us a chance to declare unequivocally that But there is an America, there is a group of citizens with a deep caring for where our nation goes and what it does in the process of going.
No corporate support, no media support, no support from the wealthy. Everything that has always been crucial to winning elections, mostly we have bought elections, had none of it and practically took over one of the two major parties.
I could sit here and tell you why Bernie's Green New Deal plan is better than all the other candidates, and it is by far, but that is not even the real reason why I support Bernie for president. I support Bernie because there's no point in having a good Green New Deal plan if you're not building the movement to win it.
There was only one person who stood up to the establishment, and his name is Bernard Sanders.
We're talking about somebody who is for real.
If you want a government that represents all of the people and not just a few, come on board the political revolution.
I paid $1,000. You know that's still less than what I paid a month in the United States.
Thank you for everything you've done these last few years. You've helped to reset our political discourse and are demanding that we center our politics around justice and equity.
We're going to elect somebody who understands that there are disparities within the disparity, and that if you are black, if you are brown, if you are indigenous, and if you are poor, this system is rigged and it is rotten to the core, and we're going to unring it.
All of us are in it together. From indigenous to white, we're all in it together.
People always say, oh, you're being too vocal. I don't feel I'm being vocal enough. We are not being vocal enough.
We're looking for a serious critique of Wall Street, not hate rich folk, but hate greed, greed, greed.
If nothing fundamentally changes for multi-millionaires and billionaires, then nothing fundamentally changes for you and you and you and you.
Who has the power in this country? How do we democratize all of our institutions? How do we give working people power over their own lives?
Louder! Yeah, we gotta get louder. How many kids are gonna have to make this sacrifice and die?
The only way we transform America is when millions of people together stand up and fight back.
And if you look at the younger voters, the people who will shape the future, they were overwhelmingly anti-Trump and even more overwhelmingly pro-Sanders. That's